now, I am going to do this thing I've never done before. And that is, I'm going to go through my life history, and I hope I don't bore you, actually. But this is going to be done quite differently than you might expect. Let me just repeat what I said earlier on today. I've been very fortunate in being raised because I never had any of the traumas and rejections and all the stuff that has gone on so traumatically with so many people. Some that have been up here and others. And it's just astonishing to me that people would treat other people that way. Because I've never had anything even remotely like what I've experienced with other people have experienced. And so in a way one would say, well, gee, Gary is very emotionally healthy. I've only used tapping for myself, by the way, just in physical events. I've never had to sit down and tap on a blood pressure problem one time, and I remember the other one. Shows you how much has been lodged back there. Hardly anything. I just very, very fortunate. I was always applauded, praised. I could do nothing wrong. It's a great way to grow up, by the way. I recommend it. On the other hand, while that appears in this world of separate bodies to be good and to be healthy, there's something wrong with it. Okay? And there's another level. Now, if you recall, when I first started this workshop, I talked about what I called my holy instant, my trip, if you will, into the other side, into the spiritual state, where these bodies don't exist and there's nothing but just bliss. And that is our true reality. I've been there. I know this is more like a dream, as we talked about before. A very real dream to us, and a very real dream to me. I mean, I'm in the dream, but I also realize there's another state. And so one of the things that I recognize in all my spiritual studies and my experiences, etc., is even though I don't have big things in my background, I have a lot of little ones, and each one of those little ones, all by itself, keeps me from being in that more spiritual state. Because any grievance I have about anybody, anything that is other than a oneness recognition, is literally keeping me from there. You're either in that state or you're not. You're either in this state or you're that state. It's not like you're sort of in that state. You're either there or you aren't. That's my experience. That doesn't mean you can't have more spiritual experiences in the body, but to get to that state, you're either there or you're not. Okay? So what I'm going to do here is go through my life story, because a lot of things I need to do about this, because there's a lot of grievances I have and attitudes that I have and so on that I recognize that are not mine, so to speak. They are my ego's. And we equate ourselves with our egos. So these are things my ego does. And I oftentimes sit back and just kind of giggle at my ego, even though I'm really into it sometimes. My ego is a fiction. My ego is also a fool. Okay? And that's one place we need to get to if we're going to get to spiritual health, I think. That is, our ego is a fool. You want to sit back and laugh at it, Let me go back a ways. I think I mentioned earlier on here in the story I told about my mother, this young man who I always competed with in sports for most valuable player and that kind of thing. His name was Dick Farley. And I remember in junior high school, before we graduated and went on to high school, there was a vote among all the players and the coaches about who the most valuable player was for all sports, etc. And the two that were vying for it was myself and Dick Farley. Now, as a practical matter, Dick Farley was a better athlete than me. I knew it then, I know it now. A few things I could do better than him, but basically, if I were to pick teams, I wanted to pick, the best athlete, I'd pick Dick before I would myself. Okay, very coordinated, good athlete, strong, all kinds of things. On the other hand, Dick Farley had a big temper. Dick Farley wasn't very popular. He would throw his bat if he struck out, for example. He used to cuss at his mother in front of everybody, a bunch of stuff like that. So he wasn't very popular. Great athlete, but he wasn't very popular. And so my ego would look at that and say, gee, I'm vying with Dick Farley. All I need to do is be popular and people will vote for me. Okay? That's the ego speaking. Okay? And so I was always, you may not believe this, by the way, but when I was in junior high and high school, even though I did well, I was always humble, because that's the way you play the game. I was the nice guy, you know. and I was, you know, that's the way I played it. And when we had this vote for who the most valuable player was in junior high school, I won it. And I remember going home. I remember Dick's father came up to me and congratulated me. Dick didn't. My dad was happy and so on, and I went home gloating. Okay? Now, in this world of separation, that's a big deal because you won, right? You won something. And now in the eyes of others, you are elevated up there someplace. And because I'm elevated in the eyes of others, I'm elevated in my own eyes because I need to do that because there's something wrong with me. I need to go out there and be elevated somehow. I need to be bigger. I need to win. I need to be on top. And I'll do what I need to do to do that. That is, my ego will do what it needs to do that. What I need to tap on is the opposite of what most people think in the world of separated bodies. Why would I tap on being a winner? In the world of separated bodies, that's good. But in the spiritual world, what I have done is elevated myself above someone else, and that is not oneness, is it? That's me needing to take myself to some other level at whose expense? Somebody else's expense. That's me turning my back on spirituality and the oneness. That's a very important thing to recognize. So even though I turn my back on Dick, and I'm better than Dick, not only am I better than Dick Farley, I'm better than everyone in that room where we voted, all those other athletes. I construct. My ego construct. My ego construct. Construct. My ego construct. Watch it strut. Now this is starting to get to me a little bit. My ego construct. My ego construct. Why am I bigger or better than Dick Farley? Why do I need to be bigger and better than Dick Farley? Wouldn't both of us be better off if we both won, or if nobody won, and if we didn't have the contest to begin with, or if I didn't have the need to be on top? My ego's a fool. My ego's a fool. I wonder what happened to Dick Farley. Last I heard, he was throwing darts at a bar. That's true. Okay. I gloated when I heard it. See, I'm better than Dick. My ego's better than Dick. Dick. See, I told you. I told you. What a fool. What a fool. I missed your beauty. You're a great athlete. But I missed your beauty. All I saw was your anger, your throwing of the bat, and the fact that I could beat you and be better than you in my own mind. My own mind. That's interesting. That got to me a little bit, even though they got to me. I think I'm a hot shot. My ego wants to be on top. I don't think that's particularly unusual with egos. I mean, who in the separated world doesn't want to be on top? Or something like that. Okay. All right. Going on a ways, I ended up going to high school and playing football, which ended up being my best sport. And I remember people would ask me at the time, why do you want to play football, Gary? And my response at the time was, for the love of the game. And if you had really challenged me at the time and told me something else, I wouldn't have believed you because I was there for the love of the game. But as I get back and look back at it, it had nothing to do with it. It was the applause, okay? You score a touchdown and people go, hooray, and your name gets in the newspaper, okay? You're in the headlines. Colleges call you, want you to go to their school. You walk on campus, people go, ooh, you know, nice game Friday night, you know. That's why I did it. It's for the applause, even though I needed applause, which my ego was mistaking for love. And I've wanted love all my life, just like anybody else. I remember my mother saying to me, I don't know why you're turning out so well, because I never loved you. I mean, I loved you, but I didn't know how to express it. I never hugged you, which is true, by the way. She never came up and gave me a big motherly hug, okay? I didn't particularly miss it. I just didn't know you were supposed to. But what's interesting also about that is even though I think I'm a hot shot, I bit my fingernails so they bled till I was 24. That's a true statement. Bite, 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 bite. I got good grades because that's what you do to get applause from teachers And other places. I beat myself up playing football. I don't know how many of you have ever played football, but when you start the season, you do 2 in a row, 2 days, 2 workouts a day. You lose 20 pounds a day in the hot riverside sun. Okay, it was basically out in the desert. You get up the next morning and every muscle in your body goes, yeah! It screams at you. Okay? All that for the love of the game. My ego's a fool. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been on top. Being on top keeps me in the way of spirituality. Keeps me out of the way of spirituality. Because it makes me think I need to be better. Makes me think I need to be on top. I have a big lesson to learn. So does my ego. Big lesson. Oneness is what we have to have. Oneness. And until I recognize oneness, I'm going to wallow around in my, quote, greatness. That's getting to me. That's good. Thank you for letting me do this. Okay? Then, one of the summer times when I was, my junior year, I guess it was, for my junior year, I met this little girl in my hometown who I had some relations with previously. We will call her Barbara. Okay? And Barbara broke me in sexually at age 15, And those were the days when buying a condom was a real no-no. You just didn't go to a drugstore and do that. So you had to pull out, if you will, which I was good at. Okay. Now, time goes on. She goes to college. I go to college, and we meet over this summer. And she wants to play, which I'm perfectly happy to do. But she kept chiding me about pulling out. I never get pregnant, she says. Okay. So, after 3 or 4 or 5 liaisons, that little affair ended for the summer. I'm back at Stanford playing 2-a-day football, getting ready for the season. And who shows up but Barbara with a friend of hers in a car? I said, what are you guys doing here? She says, well, what are we going to do with it? It? She's pregnant. Okay. And she doesn't want the child. We didn't even think about the abortion issue. That wasn't even in our thoughts. The thoughts was, we need to do something about that, So to make a long story short, it was illegal at the time. It had to be done in Tijuana in Mexico, where there was a clinic I understood you could use to do this. Now, I'm 20 years old. What do I know, okay? So I don't have any money. I had to go to Stanford, where they loan you money if you need it for hardship. Made up a hardship, got $500, which is what we needed to do to pay this clinician in Tijuana. Barbara went on down to Tijuana. We agreed on all of this. And when she went back, she called me. I couldn't go with her. She just went down, had the experience, and came back. And when she came back, she was furious with me, just furious with me. Okay. Now, notice what my ego is doing right now. My ego is telling the story in a way to justify that I was right. You hear that? Okay. I'm hearing it as well. Now, I can logically say I was right. After all, she teased me, if you will, to not pull out, if you will. I can say it's her fault she was pregnant. My ego can do all of that. Okay. But anyway, she's furious at me. She is, what's the right term? Congenial with me at the moment, but I take her home to her college. I drive back to Stanford with this kind of a attitude. Whew, we got rid of that one. That one is over. We can now both go about our lives. Okay? That was the perception I thought she had. She did not. And in fact, I saw her at a high school reunion 3 or 4 years ago, and she was still furious with me. Furious because I didn't keep following up. I didn't keep calling her. And that wasn't in my mind at all. And so even though she was still furious at me, and I could justify this thing as being right, my ego was right. It was her fault. This is all her inside job I still felt a twinge of guilt, okay? And I feel it as we speak. Logically, I did nothing wrong, but somehow in the ego point of view, I'm putting the blame on her, which is expensive for me if I want to be in the spiritual end of things. Okay. I'm taking some of my stuff and putting it on her. She's taking her stuff and putting on me, and both of us are locked out of heaven when we do that. Okay? Another time in high school, at age 16, I was playing baseball, and I was a pitcher. And one of the fellows from the team we were going to play that day, his name was Jim Cross. Jim Cross is a tall fellow, good athlete, good hitter, left-handed hitter, you know. And he says to me before the game, he says, I don't care where you throw it, I'm going to hit it big off of you. Okay, a little challenge, you know, egos doing their thing. And so the game goes on. Long about the second time I faced him, I threw this curveball. And as soon as I let go of it, I knew, uh-oh. Because the thing went up and it kind of hung in the air and then went down. It was one thing about a curveball, while it can tend to fool you, it can also be of slow pitch. And what it did was it hit to him, it went out there and then it curved out, it came on down, and it landed around, it was going to come down around his ankles, which is even out of the strike zone. He teed off that thing like it was a golf ball, like that. Now, when you're a pitcher and you throw it, you know, the ball's the size it is when it leaves your hand, but when you throw it and it ends up where the bat is, it looks more like a golf ball or even a smaller ball still. But that ball went instantly from the size of that little golf ball to the size of a basketball in my perception, right by my ear. And it went like this, and I couldn't even raise my hand to catch the ball. I couldn't. It was like that. If it had been this much farther, I wouldn't be here today. I'm serious. So, being Mr. Macho, the thing went flying out into center field. I noticed my legs were wobbling. You know, they're going like this. I was scared out of my pants. You know, I almost wet my pants. So I'm serious. And so what I had to do was walk around the mound, you know, being cool, you know, like this. And my knees were shaking, and I couldn't get my fingers from sweating, you know. And I didn't want anybody in the world to know, because Mr. Macho was sitting there scared to death. All right? Even though Mr. Macho had to be Mr. Macho. He had to be on top. He had to be this big athlete. And couldn't show human features. Not one person on the planet ever knew that my knees were wobbling. See, I can't even say it. Except you today. I never told anyone. I never told my father. I never told my mother. I never told my coach. I certainly wouldn't tell the players. I just walked around out there till I could finally stand up, okay, on my own 2 feet. What an ego. My ego's a fool. But I have to be on top, which is costing me spiritually. In the world of separated bodies, hooray, hooray, you did something good. You're out there playing baseball, you're pitching, you're getting your name in the paper, and so on. But it's costing you spiritually. It's costing me spiritually. In when was this? 1973, 1970. At the end of 1974, somebody walked into my office and handed me a lawsuit. A lawsuit? Who is suing me? Okay. I was in the investment business at the time, and there was a lawyer, who was a client of mine, that I never really did warm up to. But he had some losses in his investments, and he was blaming me, and he was going to sue me. And that, I must tell you, was the biggest emotional trauma I had. It's the only real emotional trauma I've ever had in my life. I mean, it was major, major, major. Only thing I've ever had, although it wasn't the kind of trauma where I was abused by parents or this kind of thing. But my response to that was tremendous. And I'm going to tell you this story because there's a lot of things in it about what egos do. Okay? When I first met this man, there was something about him I really didn't like. In fact, he called me. He had heard about me, and he called me. And I called him, and here was a man who was, by his accent, clearly German. and by his demeanor, and this brought up prejudice of mine I didn't realize I had. He was Hitlerian, if you will. That's what he looked like. He had this this staunch way of being, and he didn't call me Gary. He called me Geddy. Geddy, Geddy, Geddy. That's what he would call me. I don't think I ever saw the man smile. Anyway, we made some investments. That was early 73. And if you recall, 73 and 74 were the worst times in the stock market ever. You hear my ego justifying? Do you hear that? Okay. But I'm telling you, just so you know. And he had these losses. And so he wanted to blame me. And so anyway, he sues me. And so I get a lawyer. But I've got to tell you what happened was I was so involved in this thing and so worked up emotionally that it obsessed me. And I would go to bed at night, and I would sweat all night long. And to the morning, I had a T-shirt on and underwear, and that was all wet, and so was the sheets. So after a while, I just didn't bother changing the sheets. I just opened the window and let them dry out for the day because I don't have enough sheets to do all this. But that happened every day for months while this trial was unfolding, and we were going through depositions and so on. And all the time, Gary was right. I would even drive in the car, and I would yell and scream and holler and go out, because Gary's right. My ego is right. My ego is right. He's wrong. He's wrong. He's wrong. He's wrong. He's wrong. Can you hear that? Even though I had to be right. And Harvey, which is his name, could not possibly be right. He's just sitting there suing me for nothing really. If he'd have stayed with his own investments and not got involved with me, he would have lost more. That's a true statement, but listen to my ego say this, okay? My ego's got to be on top. My ego has to win. My ego has to win. It's keeping me from heaven. It's keeping me from spiritual reality. Every one of these is keeping me from heaven. Every one of them. I'm in a prison of my own making. My ego has to be right. If my ego isn't right, by the way, then it's going to look bad professionally, and I'm going to lose money. I'm going to lose business. I can justify all of this very easily. So, we go to trial, and I win. Hear my ego? Okay. See, my ego's a fool. I'm sitting back saying, I win. Hooray, I win. That SOB didn't get anything, okay? He's wrong, and I'm right. Even though he's wrong and I'm right. And that's really the way it should be. Other people should be wrong, and I get to be right. And I really can't see it from his shoes. That makes me right. I win, and I get to stay out of heaven. There's nothing oneness about Harvey and me. He's out there, and the farther away the better, and I'm in here where it's neat. Because I won. I won. I'm not sure I want this prison instead of the holy instant I once had, which I'd trade in an instant if I just would let go of my ego. So my ego being what it was, I sued him back for something called malicious prosecution, which basically means pursuing me for nothing, okay? Dragging me through this, etc. That took another 1.5 years of sweaty sheets, okay? All of which I did in the name of being right, okay? And I lost that lawsuit. So the years go by, 8, 10 years, something like that, and I decide to call Harvey. I wanted to mend fences. So I call him. He answers the phone. I says, Harvey, this is Gary Craig. And there's this silence, And I says, I thought maybe we could have lunch. And he says, and to what do I owe this pleasure? Well, it's been a long time, and I just wanted to see if we couldn't mend fences. Okay. When do you want to do this, Geddy? So we set up a time to meet for lunch at a nearby restaurant. And so we meet, and again he says as we sit down, he says, and to what do I owe displeasure again, huh? And so I repeated myself, and as the conversation went on, I said, you know, I remember something about the time when I sued you for malicious prosecution. By the way, I have to tell you something else that I did. This is my ego, by the way. At the beginning, I said, just so you know, Harvey, you remember that one investment we had? If you'd have stayed with it, it'd now be worth $1.5 million. I mean, that's the ego, right? You got it? Now, that's funny, but it's not funny because it's my ego saying, I'm better than you, I'm outside of you, I'm not with you, we're not together. This is a grievance that I have, and it is costing me, and it may cost you the same kind of things. How many of here have had something like what I'm talking about here? Okay, let's look around. You all have it. That's why I'm doing this. Okay? And so I said, this might bring a tear. Hold on a minute. So I said, Harvey, I remember on the second lawsuit when I sued you, my lawyer, or your lawyer had you understand, asking you about your background. And one of the things you said was that you fled Germany with your mother when you were a youngster. He looked at me and he said, yes. I said, does that mean you're Jewish? Did you flee Hitler? He said, yes. I had no idea he was Jewish. I don't know somebody who's Jewish or not Jewish, you know, by talking to them or seeing them or anything else. And I said, would you mind sharing with me what happened? And he looked at me like this, and then he put his head straight down to his soup. And he said, Getty, I have 2 grown sons, and I don't even tell them that. And I sat there, and suddenly I understood, okay? Because here was a man who fled Hitler and all those atrocities. And what I did as an investment counselor was I took something away from him, his perception. Okay? And I suddenly understood where he was coming from, even though I understand where he's coming from. And it took me a long time to do, many nights of sweaty sheets, a lot of money for lawyers, 2 lawsuits, to finally understand that other people do the best they can. Given their own background, experiences, and understandings. That was cathartic for me. I would love to be friends with Harvey. Harvey's not ready for that. I don't even know if he's living now. He was older than me at the time, so I don't remember if he was living. Let me close with one more. I remember my mom. This was, how long ago was this? Maybe 15 years ago. My mom came to me and she said, you know, I've saved a bunch of money, but I've always done it, you know, in dollar bills. Never put it in the bank, you know, because she grew up during Depression times and so on. And she had $60,000 she had saved her entire life by scrimping here, there, and the other place. She says, I'd like to give it to you for you to take care of it. And I said, okay. So what I did was I just took it and I put it in a money market fund, one of the safest places you can put these things. Okay? I really didn't tell her what I did with it. I mean, just put it in my. She wanted me to put it in my name someplace, so I did. And about that time, I also made another investment, a $60,000 investment by coincidence, in a startup oil company, which failed, went to zero, like that. And I was talking to Mom, I don't know, sometime later, and I just happened to mention that I invested this $60,000 in this oil company, and it went under. And unbeknownst to me, she perceived that as I lost all of her money. That's how she perceived it. Now, you talk about love. Did she ever mention that to me? No, not until her deathbed. Okay? Whew. Even though I never appreciated Mom's love. Whew. Go ahead. I deeply and completely accept myself. Even though I admire her. And she was my greatest gift. I'll get it, hold on. I was unable, my ego was unable to appreciate her To the full extent she loved me. She didn't know how to express it her way, but it was incredible. She's the greatest gift I have. Whew. Anyway. Let's do that again. I love you, Mom. Well, I've got some others on here, but they don't seem big enough now. Okay. Egos are strange things. We all have them. They need to do these things in the separated world. They need to separate themselves out. They need to compete. They need to do all these things. And all these things are actually in the way. And as far as I'm concerned, EFT is this stepping stones towards spirituality. In my perception, I think we need to get rid of those big ones first. Because who can really have true forgiveness of Harvey and the Harveys in your life until you get rid of all those grievances that you have, whether they be big, small, or otherwise. And from a spiritual point of view, it doesn't matter whether it's huge or what it seems to be a little bitter when they're all big enough to keep us in this state rather than that state.